This is Magic and How to Fix It. This episode, The Witch of the Wilds, read by Molly O'Donnell.
Magdalena's fingers felt along the smooth and cold wood grain of the shelf in front of her. She counted 5 jars along from the right, pulled one down and opened it. She rubbed the contents between her fingers. Small, squishy buds released an earthy medicinal fragrance into the air. It had been a long time since she'd created a healing balm herself. She couldn't stand the smell of balsam. She thought it best to just avoid getting injured in the first place. Gently, she poured the contents into a small metal bowl, covered it with oil, and placed it in the palm of her hand. She focused her energy onto the bowl. Her fingers numbed as she transferred the heat through her hands and into the metal. The oil popped quietly as it bubbled in her hand. Once satisfied, she placed it down to allow the contents to cool slowly and made her way to the living room to wait for their arrival. Magdalena felt the warmth of the fireplace on her skin and listened to the crackles of the fire. She considered the bliss of silence out here in the wilds. How the wind whistled through the trees and the birds sang their melodies. Magdalena had plenty of time to contemplate on the sound of the forest since her apprentice, Elzbiata, spent most of her days in town attending to errands, leaving Magdalena alone on days without clients, which was most days lately. There was a loud creak as the door opened. Magdalena did not immediately rise to greet them. Instead, she remained warm by the fire, hopeful they would leave quickly without bothering her. The whispers from the hall carried through the house, and they could be heard from the living room clear as day. Take me home. I don't want to go in, the boy whispered. Don't worry. We'll go home straight away first. Let's just put some salve on your arm. Elzbiata's voice was gentle and reassuring as always. No, I don't wanna. It doesn't hurt that much, he said with a wince. Ethan, you fell into hogsweed. At least I think it was hogsweed. Let me just have a look, Elzbiata said. See, it's fine. It's probably just nettles. The door closed with a slam. Startled, the boy jumped and ran into Magdalena, who was now waiting patiently in the kitchen doorway. Watch out, Magdalena said sternly. This is my mentor, Magdalena, the one I told you about, Elzbiata said in a gentle voice. She's the... His voice jolted as if he was nudged. This was confirmed by 2 unsteadying steps that followed. Don't you have any manners? Magdalena said. Now be still and allow me to tend to your wounds. Don't touch me, he managed, before turning and running for the door. An abrupt scream soon followed, eliciting a sense of déjà vu in Magdalena. Blisters bubbled up along his forearms as the sunlight grazed it. She had seen them in her visions. She'd felt them. It felt as if her arms were engulfed in hellfire, a searing pain so dizzying that she could barely stand. Elzbiata rushed out, and Magdalena followed close behind, spreading her hands on the cold walls to guide her until she could feel the warmth of the setting sun on her face. Foolish boy! Now look what you've done! He erupted in wails. Stop all this crying, Magdalena said callously. Come inside before it spreads any further. His cries quietened to a sniffle. His arms would be in agony by now. Quickly, Elsa. Take him inside and run cold water over his arms for a minute. I will bring the salve. You have to be brave now, Elzbiata said, their voices trailing off as they went indoors. Magda followed the sound of hushed voices and running water to lead herself inside. Hands first, she entered the doorway when she stopped and listened. How can you live here with her? He asked. She's not that bad. But she's a hag that feeds on children's nightmares. Magdalena's hands tightened into a fist. She's not a hag. She just takes some time to warm up. Just give her a chance. You shouldn't judge someone before you know them. Her voice wavered and her sentence trailed off. Even if her words stung a bit, she was right. Magdalena hardly ever warmed to anyone. Not that anyone ever wanted to stay for tea after hearing their worst fears confirmed by an infamous seer. The silence in the room lasted for a little too long. She realised they had finally noticed that she'd enter the room. "I'm blind, not deaf. Here is the salve for your arm. I didn't poison it, in case you were worried. Come sit with me in the living room. I can put it on for you," Elsbieta said, her tone always so soothing in a way Magdalena just could never achieve. She held out the salve for Elsbieta to take from her as she passed through the door into the next room, where they both plopped down onto the sofa. Perhaps he was looking at her with fear, or worse, pity. Perhaps he wasn't looking at her at all. The pain of the burns a distraction from any thoughts he might have had for the old crone. The sound of Ethan's wincing was audible above the crackle of the fire. "I thought it didn't hurt," Magdalena quipped. But she cleared her throat and decided, just this once, to take a different approach. "How do you feel? Better?" "Yes, it's better." Magdalena ran her fingers along the coarse surface of the bandage, searching for the tucked end. She extended her hand and Ethan placed his arm into the groove of her palm. Carefully, she untucked the bandage and began to wrap. "I am no healer," she said. "But if Elsa is right about the hogweed, then you will need to see someone first thing tomorrow about these. The poison from the plant makes your skin blister in the sunlight." She felt his arm pull away from hers. "Even with the salve." "If you're not a healer, then what are you?" he asked. "I'm a seer." The boy laughed. His laugh cut the atmosphere in the room. "What's so funny?" You're a seer, but you can't see." Then, Magdalena did something she thought she had forgotten how to do. She laughed. Elsbieta joined in, nervously at first, and then she too was laughing. A deep belly laugh. "I see things that others can't see. That is what makes me a seer." "Why do they call you the demon diviner?" "I've not heard that one before," she laughed. Then her tone took a serious turn. "You really want to know?" she asked. "I think so," he replied. "When I was young, that was many moons ago, I fell gravely ill. My parents took me to every healer they could find, clerics, apothecists, spellbinders, but they were all unable to heal me. I became sicker and sicker, and my parents became completely desperate. Until one day a man came to my parents and told them that he would heal me, but I would never see again. Of course they took the deal. It was a miracle. I was well again. Soon I began to see things in my mind's eye. I saw secrets, I saw omens, I knew things that I couldn't possibly have known. The miracle was a curse. Soon rumors spread that I was cursed by a demon. Eventually the whole town hated me. Even my parents were afraid of me. So I left and fled to the wilds. I have been living here ever since." "My mum says time heals all wounds." "Your mother sounds like a wise woman." "I think you'd like her." "Maybe. But she would not like me." She knew just about every reaction that people usually had to her. Those that employed her usually came out of desperation. She was the last resort. They winced at her touch and cursed her whenever she bore bad news. She was glad she could not see their faces. She hadn't met anyone who had liked her since she employed Elsa, and even she was afraid of her at first. She wasn't strong enough to withstand the manifestations of their fears any longer. "You shouldn't judge someone before you know them, you know." Chimes sounded throughout the room, signifying the hour. The sun is setting. Come, I will escort you to your home. Are you coming too? He asked Elsbieta bashfully. It is too dangerous for Elsa to be out in the wilds at night. Well, what about you? You haven't been in town in years. She brushed the dust off her cane and held it firmly in her hands. Then she stepped out into the cold evening breeze. It grazed her cheeks while she walked in silence through the wilds, over the bridge and into her hometown for the first time in a very long time. Her knees felt weak, but she continued on, focusing on the bumps of her cane. They rounded the corner past a bakery, and then Ethan came to a stop. This is me. Goodbye, Ethan. No more playing in the wilds. Promise, he said. She listened for his footsteps as he walked along the porch. It was exactly the same length as hers had been as a child. The door opened and she heard the chatter of a worried mother, her voice high-pitched and fast as she lectured him. The door closed gently as the voices became muted. Magdalena made her way along the street. Her feet still knew the way. The smell of bread baking overnight filled the air as she passed the bakery on the corner. She paused to take it all in. Brisk footsteps came up behind her and she froze. Thank you for bringing Ethan home safe. I always tell him that the wilds are dangerous. I always say that he shouldn't play beyond the Rindover Bridge, but he's just got such a curious mind, he do. Can't keep him from getting into all sorts of trouble. We're just about to have dinner. Please do join us. I must get back. My apprentice will be waiting for me. Please, do come for dinner tomorrow, just before sunset. But bring your apprentice along too. I must give you both a proper thank you. Her voice sounded so sincere. A cold, wet tear grazed Magdalena's cheek as she turned to cross the bridge back into the wild.